So what I'm going to try to do is that we did conduct some surveys in both Tanzania and then in India, and I'll just share some of the key highlights of the results of the survey. The work actually was done in collaboration with several of our project partners in both India and Taiwan, and also in Tanzania. And as you can see, all the names listed here have contributed to the presentation here. So when it gets to the question time, I think some of them are here and can also contribute to the discussions. So I'll just give an overview of the distribution and application of Bittergourd, and then the survey method that was used, and then I'll talk about production and supply chains in Asia and Africa, specifically Tanzania and India, and then the marketing as well as the consumption, and then finally some discussion points. So for those of us in the social science, I think we will not even try to stick our neck to say Bittergourd is originating from Africa or Asia, but from the literature that we have, it talks about tropical Asia and both Africa, specifically in Asia in the Indo-Burma region. But I think we've all learned this morning that it's coming from Africa. Again, maybe 19 million years ago, the continent was, the two continents were together. So I will leave it as a stand. But just to highlight that in most of the socioeconomic literature, you will not find the information that we got this morning. It's grown in several countries, in West Africa, also in East Africa, and in Asia. I think we've had some studies being conducted in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Malaysia, and China. So from the experience of the studies that we conducted, we realized that the value chains are, of course, obviously much more structured in Asia than in Africa. In the case of Tanzania, we realized that the markets, the value chains are not much structured, so it's more or less dispersed, and it was even actually difficult to find out where the production of the crop comes from, and we had to start the process by going first to the market and asking the traders where they were sourcing the produce from, and then from there we had to now trace to the producing communities and then also to consumers. I think in India that is much more easier. You could easily identify the markets. As by way of summary, realize that most of the production in India is based on the panda production method, and whereas in Tanzania it's more done on the just as normal open fields. Now, what did we wanted to know about producers? We wanted to describe the production characteristics, and of course the socioeconomic situation of the households, and then of course most importantly what is the profitability, because for the farmers more or less we expect them to also consume, but in most cases it's for commercial production. And then the markets to assess the structure, conduct and performance, and as well as also to know the linkages and then the channels. And then for consumers, the bottom line is what are the preferences, and then in terms of their nutritional awareness, and then also issues like what are they willing to pay for the functional properties of Bittergourd. Now we use a primary survey in both India and Tanzania, standard semi-structured questionnaire. In the 2011-2012 season, depending on which time of the year the survey was conducted. So the surveys were conducted in Tamil Nadu, and then in Punjab, and also in Tanzania, that was in Arusha and in the Moshi region. And these are the survey numbers. As you can see, Arusha, the numbers are quite very low, and it of course explains the situation of the structure of the value chain in Tanzania in general. Now for the sampling technique, that was where we had quite of a difference. Like I said, in the case of Tanzania, that was a bit of a challenge. So we first had to do purposive sampling. We did an exploratory survey, just trying to identify the spatially diffused production communities and also the markets. And then once we did that, we now came into the main face-to-face survey, where we use the approach called snowball sampling, because once you cannot easily identify where to get respondents, then what you do is that you identify one actor, and then the person refers you to where you can find others. And of course, scientifically, that is not quite robust as enough, but that was what was the best under the circumstance. And then, of course, once we had a population, we now drew a random sample out of that. Now, in India, that was much more easier, I mean, in that sense, because you could, but even that, I think my colleagues do also attest to the fact that there were also spatially diverse customer actor base. Now, what did we wanted to know? We wanted to know seed sources, that is critical, particularly in the case of Tanzania, the production practices that were being followed, the customer base, the marketing channels, consumer knowledge, and then of course the willingness to pay for the functional properties, like I said. So here I try to show some of the differences that was realized from the survey. You realize that again in Tanzania, average farm sizes are about 0.2 of a hectare, and mostly at the back of their compounds, or what we might call home gardens. In Tamil Nadu, on the average, these are average figures, you have about 0.47 of a hectare in terms of farm size, and mostly grown under irrigation, and in most cases it's based on furrow irrigation. There has been a lot of discussion on fruit size and color and preferences. I will come again onto this during the when I talk about consumption. Yeah, yields, again, you find higher yields in Tamil Nadu, 30.6 tons, in Punjab about 18.2, in Tanzania quite low. I mean, Dillon talks about potential yields of about 34 tons per hectare in Tanzania, but the truth of the matter is that currently on farmers' fields, that is just about 1/10 of that, and at 10.6 tons. Mostly grown in rotation, and that varies across the locations. You realize that even within India itself, there are differences in the types of cropping patterns. And then farmers' opinion, again, very diverse. Talking about production risk, some in the case of Tamil Nadu, very good returns. In the case of Tanzania, again, low yields, and farmers attribute that to the poor quality of seeds, and of course also unstructured markets. You really need to have a pre-negotiated market before you can really get into Bittergourd production. And I'll move straight into profitability, which is of interest to the farmers, even though we still expect them to consume some of the Bittergourd for their own nutritional and health purposes. You realize that average prices, well, of course, they are also quite seasonal, but this was what we had from the survey. And net returns of around 94,000 rupiah, and this is per acre. It's quite interesting that normally in most surveys in India, it is normally quoted on per acre basis, even though normally we would go back for the standard per hectare. So I think you can just bear with us here. So that certainly comes to around net returns of around 94 rupiah per hectare. If I move on to that for Punjab, you have yields. Of course, we already talked about that, around 21 tons per hectare. Real profits is about 23,000 rupiah. So of course, that can be quite expected to be much higher. Profit margin, so of course, if we do our calculations, we get up to 65.57 based on the percentage ratio. And then here I just try to make a comparison of the revenues and the costs between the two locations in India. And of course, you clearly find that it's a bit higher in Punjab. But obviously, this is just one-off survey cross-sectional data, so it has its own limitations to be able to make conclusions. Again, one of the challenges that we have in the socio-economics is that whereas our colleagues in the biosciences will always be talking about varieties, when we get to the field and we conducting surveys, it's really a challenge. I mean, if you have 10 varieties, I cannot ask the farmer to give me the yields of various varieties. And normally when it gets to the market, they normally will do some bulking, and have various varieties mixed together. So that is quite of a challenge for us. But if you really want to track the performance on various varieties, then you really need to do that first at farmers' fields, and then see how best that can be transmitted to markets. So for Arusha, you realize that on a per hectare basis, we have around a gross margin of around close to $500 per hectare. But as I said, you have farmers cultivating up to 0.2 of a hectare. So that's quite low. And in the case of Arusha, where I'm based, this is not that much comparable to some of the other vegetables like tomatoes, where you can even get up to as much as about $1,200 per hectare per season. Now we asked farmers to rank the production challenges. I think Dylan must have talked about some of them. And again, you have wide variations. People have got different problems. You realize that in Tamil Nadu, one of their major challenges, they are talking about insect pest infestation, whereas high disease occurrence is quite low on the rank. So the rank 1 means it's high and 4 is the lowest. Whereas in Punjab, you're talking about high disease incidence as a major challenge, and of course with unavailability or high price of labor as the lowest rank. Whereas in Tanzania, again, obviously, like I talked about, poor quality of seeds is a major challenge, and again, things like unavailability of water is of minor importance in terms of production challenges. Now, for marketing, I just selected some of the key channels. For Tanzania, we realized that mostly it's done by direct selling, and the interesting thing is that farmers obtain the seeds from traders. Even though we do have seed companies, but obviously they don't sell Bittergourd seeds. And it is normally coming from traders who have got pre-negotiated markets, mainly with the Indian community that is in East Africa, basically in Tanzania and also Kenya, who do requests for the Bittergourd, and then they have traders, and these traders in turn get seeds for farmers to produce. So the marketing structure channel is not well structured, and you can see that wholesale and direct selling is just about 2%, and certainly that is not the case here in India, where the market is much more structured and you have more of it being sold by wholesalers and retailers. Now, in terms of consumption, I show here again in Tanzania what factors influence consumer decision. I mean, Delon talks about the fact that there's no correlation between the bitterness and then the fruit color and all that. But the truth of the matter is that at the table level, if I remember correctly, my marketing lecturer told me that customers do not buy products. They actually buy solutions to their problems. So if I think that, for example, I'm thirsty, I might want to go for Coca-Cola, whereas somebody might also want to go for ice cream if he thinks that will quench his or her thirst. So these decisions or the purchasing power of consumers are actually determined by their perceptions. And whether that is true or not, it does not matter at the point of the purchase decision. So it's interesting to find those results from Dillon, but the truth of the matter is that if these myths of consumer perceptions are not broken, then we will still continue to have consumers thinking of color, bitterness as their destiny. So that information must get to them, and until we do that, then of course we have to ensure that demand is also, in most cases, consumer driven. So you find that one of the main things is the number of seeds, which is extremely important. If it has high number of seeds, then obviously consumers do not want that. The bitterness is crucial. and whereas things like color might not play a major role in the case of Tanzania. And here it's just to show on the market what the proportion of Bittergourd is. What happens is that most of these traders are selling Bittergourd along with several other products, and we just try to find out what the percentage is, and we realize that it forms quite a very low proportion of their trade, just about 1 to 20% in most of the areas, up to 40%. So they do have all kinds of vegetables that they are selling, and in most cases it's on a seasonal basis. What's the likability of Bittergourd among the consumers? So here I just show an example from Tamil Nadu, as I received results from our colleague, and you realize that yeah, in the peri-urban center, about 51% like it very much. If you look at also in terms of age, then of course those who are above 50 years of age, of course, do like it also very much. So these are kind of some of the variation. Some dislike, of course, also. But if you look at it in terms of age and also in terms of location, then you realize that yeah, a little bit lower in the urban area. But that tells us the kind of distribution in the various locations. Now, consumption. Ideally, if you really want to measure consumption, then we need to do 24-hour recall, and then, but that was not the purpose of this survey, so we try to sum up. In Tamil Nadu, on average, about 0.52 kilograms per week, and then in Punjab, about 0.8 kilograms, but I will not want to rely so much on this data. It's just to give us, because ideally we also need to have what is the average household size, and then we can get per capita consumption. But to get a very real data, we need to do a normal 24-hour diet recall to be able to come out with adequate data. But on the average, for example, in Tanzania, you have a consumption of 3 to 4 times per week, and that was reported by over 60% of the respondents. Again, this is just giving an overview, comparison overview of how much they like the Bittergourd, and that tells you we seem to be more or less in Tanzania like a little, whereas in Tamil Nadu they like it very much. Again, so like consumers seem to like it very much in India compared to Tanzania. Type of fruits, again, very controversial. We talk about light, dark green, following what we heard from Delon this morning. Bitterness, but this is what they talk about. Bitter is bitter, and bitter is less bitter. So the question is, what exactly do they want, and how is this linked to the compound that has the bitterness, which is I think one of the discussions that we are still on. Now, this is coming from results from Taiwan. So, and this is what consumers are saying based on their perceptions. So, they talk about most preferred shape. Well, not so sure why that should be a factor, but in marketing, this is very, very, very important. The shape, you know, how it is presented on the table is equally as important. Of course, most preferred variety. Some talk about the white, and of course the dark green is there, but the most preferred shape is that, and whereas in Taiwan specifically the most preferred variety is the white type. Here we looked again still on perception, or what benefits consumers are getting from Bittergourd. High glucose management, of course, seems to be the highest. Both here I'm referring to India and in Tamil Nadu and Punjab. And then, of course, others like gastrointestinal care play quite a prominent role. Of course, there were some no responses in the questionnaire, as could be expected. And there are other factors like detoxification and nutritional, better nutrition and fiber. That also play a prominent role in what consumers perceive. And this is very important because that drives their purchase decisions. Now, in the case of Tanzania, we just broke it down into, there's that high perception that Bittergourd does not only treat diabetes, but also treats hypertension and several other related, but about 3%, for example, think that it more or less controls hypertension. And again, these are not backed by scientific facts, but this is what drives consumers' purchasing power. And then until we are able to break all these myths, we'll have to find a means of transmitting research findings, from the breeders through the production up to what gets onto the table, and that's very important in this aspect. Now, by way of conclusion, so most of the production constraints related to pest management, which was evident in all the locations. Quality seed is a major problem in Tanzania, and that has to be dealt with. I think yesterday we talked a little bit about it during the pre-conference workshop, where most of the seeds that we use for our trials were hybrids, and actually the farmers were coming onto us when they saw some of these big fruits, because the seeds, the fruits that we have in Tanzania are very small, and they were so amazed with that. But we were cautioned that these are hybrids, and we could not give to farmers because the idea behind is that they want to save the seeds and sow them every year. And I think Geelong is working on getting us open pollinated varieties to share with the farmers at some point. Consumers are generally aware about the anti-diabetic properties of Bittergourd, but there are various perceptions about the health benefits, and this is what drives their purchase decisions, and some of these perceptions must be broken based on the scientific evidence that we can get, and that of course requires a lot of promotional and education to be able to get the message across. Again, there were a lot of issues about preparation methods, the dosage, and of course there were some side effects. So I think the optimal dosage is something that also has to be looked into, and I'm sure our colleagues in the nutrition, from the nutrition are going to talk about that as well. So thanks very much, and that's what I wanted to share with you.
Questions? Victor, I was surprised to see that net return in the two locations in India was almost identical, but yet the farmers in the two locations assessed the crop Bittergourd as low risk or high risk. I know there are slight differences in disease pressure in Punjab being higher and low labor available, but is this enough to justify to categorize the crop as high risk compared to the other location where it was assessed as low risk?
Ideally, that can be answered when we do a normal standard farm survey where we are comparing it with other crops. So we have to look at the enterprise or what we call the gross margins that I showed with other crops. And this again is also has to be location specific and also season specific. So it's a bit difficult, even though I just tried to show a comparison. But again, like I said, this is also 1 year cross-sectional data, so you cannot use that as a basis to make a firm conclusion. And I think whereas pest was a major problem, I think in Punjab, in the other location, the critical problem there was diseases. So these then will have serious implications for the cost side, for the cost side of the equation. If it is, for example, diseases, then they have to spray fungicides a lot, and it depends on how much went into that. So you might see the figures, absolute figures as that, but ideally, if you want to make a comparison of the enterprise, then what we need to do is to calculate the benefit-cost ratio of each enterprise, and then you can compare across, but not to look at the absolute figures.
Let me add one thing, because I'm DK grower from Punjab. Actually, when we say risky crop, again it's a relative. In case of Punjab, the competing crop is rice. And when we ask this question to the respondent, because competing is rice, and in relation to rice, how risky is the bitter crop? So rice is a very stable crop. minimum risk is involved with regard to the yield as well as with the price, because this is a government supported crop. So in relation to paddy or rice, this growing of bitter gourd is much more risky. But in maybe in case of Tamil Nadu, again the competing, it is in relation with the competing crop, whether they have said is a low risky or high risky. So it should be taken in that way, in one location, competing crop and bitter gourd. So, yeah.
Yeah, Victor, I'll be interested to know whether the type of soil plays a role in production.
I think that is better responded by Dillon and his colleagues. We are looking at how farmers are getting money and stuff like that. So maybe Dillon can help.
Can you respond to that?
Yeah.
With the
Yeah.
permission of the chairman.
Yeah. Yeah, sandy loam soils, you know, here they're very good for sandy loam soils, very good for this Bittergourd. And in our place in Kampensand, and we have a mostly clay soil, and there are also organic matter is now 1.1%, and it is also doing very well there. But certainly in sandy soils, it will not do very good because you have to add more nutrients there. But in case of your, what is the soil type in Arusha? I do not know. It's very high yielding there.
The soil in Arusha is volcanic.
Volcanic, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very volcanic. The same applies to Kilimanjaro as well. It's very volcanic.
Yeah. And Arusha, it does very well.
Any questions?
I would like to know how many percent of the acreage in Africa is already hybrids?
Again, you mean on farmers' fields?
On farmers' fields.
Currently, I think there are a few seed companies who are, but the truth of the fact is that the farmers are not buying from seed companies. I mean, it's not even just Bittergourd. We're talking about 75 to 80% of seeds still coming from the informal sector, you know. So even for tomatoes and or most of the other commercial crops. So for Bittergourd, I will expect it to be very, very low. You know. And but the point is that based on the trials that we did at our center, they did see the clear difference between what comes out of the hybrids and what comes out of the local variety. If you compare the two, there's a very wide contrast. And that is why we have the challenge with farmers, because they want something that they can save. If he buys one today, something that he can use for 3 or 4 seasons. You know, and we've had a successful experience of some of our open pollinated varieties, which are actually, like in the case of tomato, which is competing seriously with some of the hybrids from seed companies. You know, so it's a challenge, but obviously I can just take them as very, very low usage of hybrid Bittergourd seeds at the moment.
Thank you, Victor.